Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Medical Device Sales Insider live podcast. I'm Steve Porcaro, and joining me, as usual, is Barry Rubin. Say hi,
Hi,
Barry.
everybody.
Hi. Today, we're going to be talking about finding the right members for your team or the ideal team player. One of the things that's very interesting, we're using this theme as a kickoff to start the discussion. Our goal here is to take your questions and help share some answers, some insight that Barry and we've been running and managing and moderating, 10 years now, I think 4 or 5 medical device groups on LinkedIn. And sometimes we have all this excess of information, knowledge, insight, wisdom, and some days we're drawing a blank. But today, I wanted to jump off the discussion with what is the ideal team player. And before we do that, quick housekeeping tip. If you're on the call and we get disconnected, please dial back in. For the most part, we've been pretty fortunate not having too many technical issues, but I was on a webinar this morning and the woman presenting was calling from, I think, the Netherlands, Germany, and there was an echo. It was very hard. And everyone valiantly tried to help, but at the end of the day, she had to jump off and try to call back in. For us, if you're on the phone and you're listening and you'd like to submit a question, you can text us 860-243-9757. If you text your question, we'll get that. You can also email us as well, info@salesplusmvp.com. We also try to get the recording out in the next day or so. So if you're on the call and you have to jump off, not a problem, we understand. But today, our theme, and sticking with our schedule, I wanted to share some information about either hiring the right person for your team, or if you're on the other end, trying to be hired to join a new organization and be that ideal team player. So in the past, I've shared this book before, The Ideal Team Player. Patrick Lencioni. It's a great book, but he also wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And the interesting part is I fell onto some of his stuff half a dozen years ago working with an organization. And it's funny, actually I have a client now who has trouble trying to find people to keep on her team. And one of the things that's very challenging, what is the ideal team player for your organization? More importantly, what does that mean when somebody says we're looking for the right fit? So what I wanted to do is kick off the discussion with sharing what the ideal team player means to Patrick when he wrote this book. So when he's talking about the ideal team player, he's talking about the 3 components. They're hungry, humble, and smart. People smart. So when you talk about the ideal team player being humble, they lack excessive ego or concerns about status. Humble people are quick to point out the contributions of others and slow to seek attention for their own. They share credit, emphasize team over self, and define success collectively rather than individually. This is Patrick's definition of humble. When he talks about hungry team players are always looking for more things to do, more to learn, more responsibility to take on. Hungry people almost never have to be pushed by a manager to work harder because they are self-motivated and diligent. They are constantly thinking about the next step and the next opportunity. And the last one, smart. Ideal team players are people smart. They have common sense about people. Smart people tend to know what is happening in a group situation and how to deal with others in the most effective way. They have good judgment and intuition around the group dynamics and the impact of their words and actions. So here's the big takeaway, though. When you combine these three virtues, what makes somebody hungry, humble, and smart? It's powerful and it's unique, but it's the combination of all these attributes that makes somebody a good fit for the organization. It's the combination of all three. Even though we talk about corporate culture, there is also this ideal team player culture. How hungry, how humble, how people smart. If one attribute is missing in a team member, it becomes difficult and sometimes impossible for that person to be part of that team. And again, we've all worked in organizations where you have very hungry people, very humble people, and very people smart. But again, just like a professional athlete, musician, actor, and the list goes on, you need to have the right attributes to be a member of that team. So what I wanted to do was lay that foundation out there. And again, I'm just sharing the overview of this book. And if you get a chance, I'm going to share some a few PDF summaries I think I can put into the body of this recording that share the summary of the book and the attributes of what people are looking for. Whether you're looking to hire people or you're looking to be hired, you need to find out what is the company or the organization using to benchmark each one of these attributes. Because when I say hungry, it means one thing to me. When I say humble, it means one thing to you. And when I say people smart, how do we quantify that? So each job has a benchmark or some types of significance that we can use to measure that. And there are criteria in the book, and in the book, they talk about using assessment tools, which I use with my clients. They talk about interview questions, being prepared to ask and answer the right interview questions. But more importantly, having the mindset of being that ideal team member or having that ideal team organization where you're putting together that high-performing organization. I think it's something that for a long time, a lot of people have talked about or around this concept. It was hard to quantify that. And I think when he wrote his first book, Patrick Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions of the team, he started to realize that there was a common denominator there. And there were times when we all have seen things that were happening in an organization that were trends or chronic, and it was hard to break that cycle. But once you break the cycle and you go from minimizing, or you're out of that storming stage or that forming stage, and you go to that norming and then performing stage, you'll start to see what the dynamics are. So this separates a high-performing organization from one that's struggling on a regular basis. So I want to take a moment and talk about some examples of some of these people, and then open it up to questions, and then we'll share some tips. But the interesting thing is, if you think about a Venn diagram, hungry, humble, smart, where they overlap, that's going to be slightly different for each organization, depending on the type of products, services, and the call or the target industry that you're providing a service for. What I mean is, again, if you're in healthcare, medical device, biotech, pharma, and the list goes on, it will be a slightly different organization. And if you asked a hiring manager or an organization, what's their ideal team player look like, I think you would get a variety of these answers. But for you, this is where you're over here saying either I'm looking to hire somebody and I want to be able to articulate that when I'm putting a job out there, or more importantly, if you're on the other end and you're transitioning and you want to apply for a job, you want to make sure you can understand what this company is looking for. Last week, we talked about transitioning and interview tips and how to really be prepared for that. It's funny how everything is circular, right? You can't have one without the other. If you're creating a high-performing organization and you're looking to hire high-performing individuals, and you're saying you're a high-performing individual, what does that mean? How do you want to make sure that you can interdigitate, dovetail in such a way that when you meet with somebody or you're networking, or whether you're using your LinkedIn profile or you're getting a warm referral, that there's a commonality, a language, skill set, attributes that it resonates with people. All right, so I'm going to take a quick break here for a minute, catch my breath. I want to open it up to questions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In the meantime, Barry, any examples? Have you ever met somebody? And, you know, it's funny, my wife is in a position right now. She works in a nonprofit role, and she's the office manager, operations type person, but she's in charge of the volunteers. And when I think of people smart, my wife is like the perfect person. She knows how to go in there and deal with people who are very irate. Me, I'm going to go in there and just smack them around and say, come on, guys, stop it. I'm not that way. My wife is very good that way. So when there's things that have to be handled that way, I'll send my wife in because she's much more diplomatic than I am. So it is pretty funny. But Barry, when you were in practice management, you know, we talked about people coming in, and because you were working with patients directly, or you've worked with people who worked with patients directly. In the operating room, most of my clients were sleeping, right? My patients, the end users. So I didn't really get to see them often, but what was your experience of people smart people? I'm sure you ran into people who were very good interacting with clients on the front end, and some people who weren't very good at it.
Yes, and it's an interesting phenomenon because in the private practice side of medicine, you know, the technicians are extremely important for clinic flow. And in several of the practices that I visited, they had some very, very strong clinicians with really poor people skills. And that's kind of a paradox because you're dealing directly with the patients to test them for whatever they're being tested for, but they weren't comfortable talking to people. It was like they wanted to hide behind their testing equipment. So a lot of times, part of what I would do is when I was doing a practice assessment, there might be a technician who maybe wasn't quite as strong on their testing skills, but they were really great with people. So there were several times where I would have a discussion with the doctor about making sure that the people were in their right seats on the bus. Fortunately, most of the technicians were good team players, but they weren't always placed in the right position on the team. So watching and observing and figuring that out was very helpful, because in switching which technicians were the ones that would help educate the patient or have a conversation with them about scheduling, the end result was better conversion rates. So it just speaks to how important it is to put the right team players in the right place. Thankfully, they were all team players. So that was the good thing. But the other thing that I experienced was a clinical trainer who was a physician, but he also had a degree in human behavioral science. And that was very helpful because you could actually see his wheels turning and changing his focus from one method of teaching to another, depending on who he was teaching. So he would teach differently with the physicians or the clinicians and the technicians based on adult learning and development principles. And that was fascinating to watch. So there's my example.
No, thank you, Barry. And it's very interesting. And why did I have Barry kick off with that example is because it's interesting when you think about the ideal team player for a sales role or a sales leadership role. Again, we go back to using the sports teams analogy. A lot of different sales roles out there, everywhere from a hunter to a farmer to a sales consultative. So the attributes needed to be an effective or an ideal team member will be different from one organization, one role to another. So what happens is it's interesting when people say, yeah, I can certainly do the job. You may have the basic skill set. It's like driving a car. So some of you remembered, I think a couple weeks ago, I drove down to pick up my son from boot camp. I rented a 2020 Chevy Suburban. My Suburban's 20 years old. I don't think it would have made the trip, but getting a new Suburban, it was beautiful. It was like a shuttlecraft from Star Trek. But what happens is when you rent a new car and you get in it, you still have the basic skills of driving, but it took me a few minutes or an hour to get used to handling a new vehicle, right? We have to adjust our style. And over time, I'm thinking, yeah, I could get used to this car. And other times I've rented vehicles, I said, not a car for me. I'll use it for the next few days, but long term, it's not where I want to be. So when you think about transitioning into organizations, there's always a minimal skill set, a minimal humbleness needed, a minimal amount of being hungry, and a minimum amount of people smart. But what happens is people don't want the minimum, right? They want people who can bring more to the table. So one of the things I want to share, and again, if you have questions along this line, start thinking about what type of questions you have for us, but more importantly, for an organization. There are tools to help us. There are things you can do to help you focus on what makes you successful, because at the end of the day, that's one of the things people forget. Again, you want an organization, a manager, a culture, a company, a product, a service that's going to allow you to do more of the things you're good at than less. So here's some of the qualities. And again, I'm sharing a list that's been out there for a while. I've added some of my nuances. But when you think about what people are looking for in a company, how about reliability? You want somebody who can demonstrate reliability. You can count on a reliable team member who gets work done and does his or her fair share to work hard and meet commitments. He or she follows through on assignments. You can count on good performance all the time, not just some of the time. Now, if you're an organization and you want somebody to step up, is that one of the things that you want? I think it does. Barry, do you want to share the next one, or do you want me to follow through?
You can keep going. I've got another screen open, so I don't have it pulled up.
Okay, not a problem. Here's a second one, I think. And, sometimes I'd like to think they're in a particular order, but I think it depends on the role in the company and what's important to that organization. How about communicates constructively? Teams need people who speak up, communicate constructively, and express their thoughts and ideas clearly, directly, honestly, and with respect for others and for the work of the team. That's a tough one. And some organizations, and I've worked with people, I can't say a word. My manager or my coworkers don't allow me to share ideas. And sometimes it's the atmosphere, sometimes it's the culture. But I think as a ideal team member, that's one of the things as a quality you want to bring. More importantly, if you're hiring, I think that's what you would like to have on your team. All right, here's one. You may have heard this before, active listening. Good listeners are essential for teams to function effectively. Teams need team players who listen first, speak second, and consider ideas and points of view from other people without debating and arguing every point. Oh, Barry, you going to argue that point?
No, not at all. It was just, there's a saying that floats around and it makes me laugh every time I hear it. And it's God gave us one mouth and two ears, so you should always listen twice as much as you talk. And as far as active listening goes, yes, you want someone who's not going to argue every single point, but you also want someone who is going to contribute constructively. So you by being an active listener, it doesn't mean you have to be a sheep, but you want to make sure you've heard well enough that you can contribute something to improve on some, there's not argue with it, but enhance it.
Right.
Once you've heard.
So that's a great segue. So the next one, when you think about another quality of an effective team player, functions as an active participant. It's funny because when I read this, some of these attributes are very similar to being part of a coaching conversation, right? Being present in the moment, being there and listening. But an active participant are required for good team players. They come prepared to listen and speak. They're fully engaged in the work of the team and do not sit passively on the sidelines. So on one hand, and this is where, and I struggled with this, on one hand, I was raised to kind of jump in and help. On the other hand, I had to throttle back and say, oh, not everything requires me to take charge in every situation. And I was always used to questioning that. Sometimes I had to stop and say, okay, I'm not in charge. The funny thing is, and again, my own personal experience is when you're used to being a team member and then all of a sudden you have to be the team leader, it shifts. So, and one of the things in scouting and one of the things I taught my boys and we worked on in progress is that when you're on a team at any given time, you may be asked to step up into a leadership role or a follower role. On a side note, depending on the needs of the team. It was interesting growing up, and we all can look back and see examples as a child in our youth, college, high school, military, where we've seen those examples. All right, here's another one. It's going to sound redundant, but listens actively. I know I said that, but here's part two. Teams need team players who can absorb, understand, and consider ideas and points of view from other people without debating and arguing. Team members need the discipline to listen first and speak second, so that meaningful dialogue results. It's the art of conversation. In some ways, we've lost that. And I'm guilty. I was raised to communicate, and if I, needed to raise my voice to get a point across, that was the way I was raised, right? Everyone, you had a big family. My father, my mother's side, I didn't know any better until I got to the real world and said, hey, that doesn't work. So the communication journey for me, I've seen many aspects and facets of that, and it is amazing how good team players are good communicators. And my wife is an excellent communicator, and I've learned a lot from her. And at some point, these are the basic skills that help you get to that next level. All right, so the next one, shares openly and willingly. Good team members share. They're willing to share information, knowledge, and experience. They take the initiative to keep other team members informed. And again, there's a component here of communication, but the idea that, this is my information and I'm holding it close to my vest. At the end of the day, the team sinks or swims that works together. So you want to be able to share that information. The next tip I want to share, cooperates and pitches in to help. Effective team members figure out ways to work together to solve problems and get work done. They respond to requests for help and take the initiative to offer help. I think about many organizations, and for a long time when I was in outside sales, I was a team of one, and it was very hard sometimes to get things done. And then when we did have help, it was hard for me to ask, because I developed this behavior, this habit of doing things myself. But once I realized I was more successful and more productive when I worked with a team, all of a sudden, my wife said to me, "Why do you keep asking for help?" I said, "Because I can't do it myself. The secret to success is being part of a team." And it was a very enlightening experience to realize that when you give and take as a team, it comes both ways. So the more you give, the more you get back. So is that what you're going to say, Barry? Go ahead, take it away.
No, I just wanted to give another example of cooperation and pitching in to help. There was someone that started with their company shortly after I had just gotten promoted in mine. And I watched her enter the space, and it reminded me of when I started, how there were times when I would ask for help and people would kind of roll their eyes as if pitching in was an inconvenience. And it was very uncomfortable because I'm not afraid to ask for help. So when I saw her entering the space and struggling a little bit, I went over and introduced myself and said, if you need anything or if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always here to help you, because I know what it feels like when you reach out and there's no one to help. So, don't be afraid. And she just kind of looked at me like I was an alien. She said, "Nobody's ever done that before." And I said, "Well, I just treat people the way I would want to be treated." And it came back to me tenfold. And the fact that I am still friends with that woman 30 years later, because that was the beginning of our relationship, speaks to what a positive impact just being willing to help, even if you're never asked to, can have in a work environment.
Thank you, Barry. That's a very powerful feeling, knowing that somebody has your back on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So, all right. So the next one is near and dear to my heart. This tip here exhibits flexibility. Good team players roll with the punches. They adapt to ever-changing situations. They don't complain or get stressed out because something new is being tried or some new direction is being set. Strong team players are firm in their thoughts, yet flexible and open to do what others have to offer. Very interesting. On one hand, we crave consistency. We crave routine. We do it every day. There are certain things we do because it helps us. We talk about practice makes perfect. Yet on the other hand, now that I have 3 Marines And, we always talked about being prepared in scouting. The motto that we use there is overcome, improvise, and adapt, because you're going to be in unknown situations on a regular basis. And I think sometimes when it's a mindset, I have yet to have, I may start off with a plan for a normal day, but again, when I was out in the field doing orthopedic trauma, it was changing on a dime. The wind would blow and I'd have all these things coming on. I thought it was only in the trauma world, but I realized it was life in general. And sometimes, there are times when I wish things were a little less flexible and I could stay focused. And there are times when we fall into a routine and a pattern, which is nice. But I think at the end of the day, when you think about a team player, there are going to be things that come up. It happens all the time. Technology challenges, business challenge, personnel challenges. We're dealing with customers. We're dealing with people. Things happen. And if you have an open mind to that, I would rather lead change than be dragged by it. So when you go into that with a certain perspective, it helps you prepare for that. Couple more, and then we'll open up for questions. I think this is interesting, again, when it goes back to what's an effective team member look like for your organization, working as a problem solver. Good team members are willing to deal with all types of problems in a solutions-oriented manner. They're problem solvers, not problem dwellers, problem blamers, or problem avoiders. Team players get problems out in the open for discussion and then collaborate with others to find solutions and form action plans. Now, again, depending on your role, I think if you're in sales, everything we do is solve problems. We have to be creative on how to help our customers and our clients with their problems. And I think if you've been in sales for more than a day, you appreciate that. But the interesting thing is there are some organizations that have a mentality of one size fits all, and you have to sell it this way. It only works this way. And that's true. Maybe the product. I know there are friends of mine who sold pharmaceuticals, and they were always getting, they would always share stories about people using their device or the pharmaceutical off-label. On one hand, yes, you're solving a problem, but you're also opening up another can of worms you got to be careful for. So I don't know if I would recommend doing off-label, but sometimes you have to. The funny thing is innovation, and I can think back in orthopedics, some of the physicians out there who were on the cutting edge of some of this technology, they had to be innovators, and this started the impetus for a new technology going in a new direction. But at the end of the day, I'm not talking about that as much as I want you to be looking at things from a certain perspective. If you're a problem solver, if you're a fixer, you want to be out there with that attitude. It's really a can-do attitude. All right, and the last one. Treats others in a respectful and supportive manner. Team players consistently treat fellow team members with courtesy and consideration. They show understanding and the appropriate support of other team members to help get the job done. Good team players also have a sense of humor and know how to have fun, but they don't have fun at someone else's expense. So it's funny, these were 10 qualities that some managers would like to have. I know I've looked at some of these, and when I think about team players, these are people that I've liked to work with. Two things come to mind. Mentioned attitude. Attitude, to me, summarizes some of this whole thing, right? If you don't have the proper attitude, it doesn't matter if you have all of these qualities, because your attitude will either make or break you. And the second thing here is, these are good qualities for virtually any team. I can't think of a team where this doesn't, whether it's a relationship, sales, leadership team, customer service, sports, anything. these are basic qualities that belong on every team. So whether, again, you're looking to hire somebody or you're looking to be hired, think of these 10 qualities as your foundation or your basic skill set that you want to bring to the interview process, regardless of what side of the table you're on. All right, so we're getting to the bottom of the hour. It's a little bit over. I want to see any other questions out there. I'm going to check. Barry, you have any questions on your end?
Nope, still waiting for him to come in.
Okay, well, that's fine. I know sometimes some of the questions get answered up front when we share this. So one of the things I wanted to do was, again, use this information to stimulate discussion and maybe throw out there what's one of the best qualities. If you're on the call or if you're listening on a recording, feel free to send it along. What's one of the best qualities that you've run into from a team member or a colleague or a coworker? Anyone have a good attribute or something that they ran into that was very effective? So, all right. So in terms of our questions, I think we're going to go easy on our questions today, Barry. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I love sharing these tips of an ideal team player and these concepts of hungry, humble, and smart, people smart. I shared some tips, and I think they'll be helpful going forward. But if you have any questions or you want to discuss this offline, feel free to reach out to Barry and myself. Will be here. We're somewhere online on LinkedIn. We may be in one of the groups. We may be sharing something. We have calls coming up next week at the same time, same bat channel. But in the meantime, have a great week and remember to be that ideal team player for your team. Barry, any final words before we wrap it up?
Yeah, just, the golden rule really does apply here, and just keep it simple. Be excellent to each other, as Bill and Ted would say. And on that note, we'll see everybody next week.
Bill and Ted. All right. Thanks, Barry. We'll see you later. Have a good week, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.